Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it a few minutes so that people can get logged in, and then we'll get started. Thanks again for joining. We'll just take a minute so people can log in. All right, so I'm seeing enough folks logged in now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us again, and good morning. We're excited to bring back our Asset and Property Management Workshop series, and this is the first workshop in the 2023 series this summer. We'll have 3 more sessions over the course of the summer months, so stay tuned for those announcements and all those registration links that will be sent out. And this session is titled Working Hand in Hand, Property Manager and Supportive Services Collaboration. And it's a very helpful session that will take a deep dive into the collaborations needed between property management and supportive services staff. We have 2 excellent experts who will dive into this topic. It's AJ Gelka. She's the Director of Permanent Supportive Housing and Residential Services at National Core, and Courtney Richards, the Vice President of Property Management at National Core as well. So thank you guys so much for doing it, and I'll leave it to you guys to kick it off.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to just say thank you guys for tuning in with us today. I know we are very close to a holiday weekend, so I'm excited to see all the attendees. So if you guys are tuned in from the last time or are new, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Courtney Richard. I have been with National Core almost 11 years now. So we are a nonprofit affordable housing developer. We tend to call ourselves the one-stop shop. We do property management on our sites. We have an in-house development department, construction, relocation, asset management, accounting, you name it, we probably do it. And so it just like a lot of you guys out there, we recently started to get into the realm of permanent supportive housing. And I would say we've done a pretty good job at it. We have some bumps in the road, but along the way we've learned a lot. We've had AJ join the team. And so with that being said, I'll go ahead and kick it over to AJ to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I feel very fortunate to work side by side with Courtney because we have the residents' best interest in mind. I come up from a background of social work. So in my 20-year career, half of it was direct service, working directly with street outreach from Skid Row to in-home case management and coordination. And then I moved over to the program side and administration in the sense of housing. So I've worked everywhere from housing authority to healthcare, and I love serving people. So it's definitely wonderful to work side by side with Courtney, who has that experience and that shared mission of helping people succeed and having true retention and quality of life in housing.
So let's go ahead and get started. So just a little bit about National Core, if you're not familiar with us, which I believe many of you are. Again, we are a nonprofit affordable housing developer. We're based out of Southern California. But we do have properties in the Texas area, Northern California, Florida area. We're growing like crazy. So a lot of you guys may have recently I saw one of our lease up flyers going out or some of the advertisements with some of the new properties we have coming online. So one of the things we definitely we strive to do is break a lot of the generational curses out there, I would say, and also generational poverty. And so the way that we're able to do that is we implement programs on our sites, and we definitely definitely strive to empower the individuals living on our sites. One of our mottos, and you'll hear us say it a lot, is this is a launching pad. It's not a landing pad. And so we want our residents to, find housing stability with us, but we want it just to be a starting point for them, especially when, the moving on site, coming right off the streets and being able to take away, the uncertainty of where they're going to lay their heads at night. And once they're able to take that piece out of the equation, then we start on financial stability, finding, a stable job and childcare and things of those sorts. So next slide. And so we were founded in 1992. The last time we actually completed this presentation last year, we only had, I believe, around 300 employees. And so we have hit the 500 employee mark. We have over 10,000 units, over 30,000 residents. And I would say within the last 3 weeks, we actually just hit the mark of becoming the nation's third largest nonprofit affordable housing developer. So yay us. And again, if you take a look at the slide, you will be able to see just all the services that we offer at National Core. If you tuned in last year, we touched on the relationship between property management and the service provider. And today we plan to just go a little bit deeper into those relationships. Next slide.
Thanks, Courtney. So for supportive housing, specifically within the portfolio that Courtney went over, we have over 608 units, 25 sites of vulnerable population supportive housing leased up or currently in lease up process units, 709 units in the pipeline for 21 sites. And then 400 of those 709, 446, 13 sites in construction, 263 units, 8 sites in development, meaning they're piecing together the funding, they're working out the logistics of partnerships and so forth. And this is a moving target. So sometimes we add them every single week, subtract them for this bottom category. But all in all, it will be a total of 46 communities and 1,317 vulnerable populations, supportive housing units. And this does not include any type of acquisition properties that we may procure in other locations. For Hope Through Housing Foundation, which I like to call the sister nonprofit of CORE, it is a foundation arm of CORE. It was established in 1992. By the end of this year, we're going to have over 9,539 units. So that's 93 sites of embedded services within the CORE portfolio. They provide a multitude of different services. Previously, where we do financial coaching, budgeting, bring in bank partners and other folks to really help with things and guide folks through that process of financial stability. Promoting seniors' health and wellness in a variety of ways, partnering up with Kaiser grants and other creative ways to create healthy smoothies, how to live an active lifestyle, and then fostering stability and independence across our most vulnerable, disabled, those who have experienced homelessness. And actually, really quick, taking a step back, one of the things that Hope and CORE strive to do is really look at data trends, whether it be in our Yardy side of the house, which is property management, Courtney's arm, or sustainability or cost saving measures. So we really use data entry as a way to guide how we can best serve our populations across our sites. Meaning we have surveys, feedback, we track service use by site, by population, so we can really see what is the best pattern of service, what folks want at that particular site. And then across sites, we can see what are common incidences, what are things that might need more intervention that could create cost savings. And then between Courtney and I and working with construction and development, we can really look at ways that we can improve design, that we can improve walking flow into buildings, which we'll touch on later, and really look at how to be creative and innovative to make sure we have cost savings, but really effective physical properties as well. So today we'll cover these topics. I won't go through and read them all because Courtney reviewed them previously, but you'll get a nice taste of different categories, and we've enhanced it since our last presentation. And then just to get the talking flowing, in the chat, from your own personal perspective, what do you need to feel stable in your life? What absolutely must exist for you? If you think about every single day of your life, waking up in the morning, falling asleep, what's something you just cannot live without to feel stable? Okay, I see bed, housing, sleep, food.
Consistency, music. I, I love music too. Enough money. Health.
Family. Love. I love that one.
Me too. Safety, huge.
Definitely.
Housing
Housing and health. Sorry.
Family also is huge.
Hygiene. Hope.
Yep. I love that one too. Church family.
Excellent. So with that said, you can kind of see common threads with all of us. And looking at the social determinants of health, all of us need things to keep balanced and feeling good and thriving as a human being. So it should reflect in the way that we provide our housing. And Courtney and I both work hand in hand in the sense that we want to make sure we echo the same sentiment and how we serve people and how we ensure folks' housing serves them best. So in the sense of the social determinants of health, it's a beautiful human equation of things that help balance a person's life at every single one of them, essentially, you guys listed. So, access to growing as a human being, education, healthcare, so well-being, financial stability, which both Courtney and I echoed in the sense we want to create that break of generational poverty, social and community context, so that connectivity with others, that social connectivity, the family, if they have connections to their family or friends, or they build a community within their housing. And then just the overall environment, the neighborhoods that the communities reside in. So creating that kind of bridge to connect with local organizations, senior centers, youth centers, Boys and Girls Club, and so forth at the sites.
So competing objectives. So property management and the service providers. So the next section will be getting into this and the relationship and just going over how sometimes we can have competing objectives, but in the end, we still come together and we come up with a solution. Next slide, AJ.
So our mindset, our collective mindset and approach, as Courtney mentioned, we have those competing objectives. One, asset management, community management, services, making sure the individual thrives and succeeds in housing. And both of those get blended if you're working together and truly working together, like Courtney and my teams are. So in the sense of that, we use common threads to work together, that weave together. So trauma-informed, making sure we approach people with respect, trauma-informed, we're nimble. We're not having a fixed mindset. We're able to kind of adapt and shapeshift with various partners, populations. I'm sure we could share many stories, Courtney, on like how we make that work. Harm reduction, making sure everybody's educated in what harm reduction truly means and is in housing. Culture of competency, being collaborative, like truly collaborative with our partnerships, community partnerships, police departments, emergency response, you name it. Balance between those two competing objectives, being mindful of each other's competing objectives and ensuring that we respect each area, meaning we might be advocating for the resident, but we also have to be aware of what property management role is and be respectful of how do we have that balance out of respect of our roles. And then retention focused overall across everything we do. And I always like to add this in because both Courtney and I, we strive to look at data, we strive to learn, we strive to avoid assumptions, like saying this unit might be more expensive than this unit, because it varies person to person, family to family, unit to unit. And so we really want to ensure not only we have, common knowledge, baseline knowledge across our teams, that everybody knows what harm reduction is, that everybody knows what trauma-informed care is, that everybody knows what our, objectives are in our roles, or what services are provided. We educate each other constantly in what we do, but we also use the data, like I mentioned, across site surveys, incident reports, insurance claims, looking at various ways to improve utilization in services. Property might property management might notice a trend in something. So Courtney is going to educate me and say, I'm seeing this trend at this one site. And I'll be like, okay, let's figure out a solution and how we can educate our community. It could be, I shouldn't say simple, thing like bed bugs. We all have situations with bed bugs. We've all experienced bed bugs, but what could we do to be proactive? So, we're constantly communicating and educating the community, and it's not just a one-time thing, but it's looking at trends, even healthcare engagement. How do we bridge to healthcare and things like that? Is there anything you wanted to add, Courtney?
No, you touched on everything. Great job.
And then just one other thing for infrastructure is Courtney and I work a lot on policies to ensure that things are clear and how our teams are supposed to follow protocol and policies. And it doesn't mean things are fixed, meaning, we might get a new funding stream or a new property and we realize we could be improving something. So I think, you and I both could probably attest to this, that we constantly look at what exists and we constantly look at how we can improve. And then this is just a quick glimpse of the training that Courtney and I put on with our teams to educate everyone from facilities to property management, to even acquisitions and development, folks attend from there, even fiscal, and our services teams. We often invite our partners as well. We ask a lot of our partners, depending on what region we're hosting it in, that they attend the panel sessions. So we have property managers able to ask questions, be vulnerable, and say, what if this doesn't happen? Or, what is your role in this? Are you going to do this? And so folks have realistic expectations. Folks have a baseline understanding of what's expected. And again, know what trauma informed is. Like, we're not just going to say we're going to do it. We're going to really understand it as a group of people, serving our residents. And then obviously compliance, we all have compliance that we have to adhere to. But overall, having that echoed messaging, that echoed understanding as a whole. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so this was definitely huge for our organization. And I know many of you guys out there, you guys work at sites where you have permanent supportive housing units. And I know early on, if you've been in property management for a while, it was definitely a change in operations. And so, and also, let's just put it out there, hiring right now is pretty difficult. So we are having to take on employees that may have little to no property management experience and no experience in the service department. And so coming up with a training where it not only focuses on the property management side of things, but also the services side of things, and understanding just from all standpoints, it was huge. And I think our sites benefited a lot from it. And so if you are part of an organization and you have really no training geared towards this, I would definitely suggest putting this into play as soon as possible. Next slide, AJ. So clarity on roles and responsibilities, guys, is definitely key. And so we've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations with our first sites coming on board that had permanent supportive housing units. And so early on, it is definitely important for everyone to get together and really map out what each party's roles and responsibilities are going to be. Just word of advice, typically when you don't do this, it tends to be kind of a blame game in the sense. So you're in a meeting, everyone's pointing fingers, and when you leave the meeting, you're like, okay, we didn't get anywhere because we all just stared at each other pointing fingers. So sitting down early on and understanding those roles and which party is responsible for different things. And I know AJ coming on board, she created a chart, and that chart helped us out so much, because when lines started to become blurred and you were a bit lost, you could always refer back to that chart and say, oh, you know what, that actually is not my role. It is Stephanie or Alejandro's role. And so let me, have a conversation with them. But in order for your sites to be successful, guys, you really have to be able to spell out those roles. And so AJ, I'll let you touch on this form.
No worries. And this one's a little bit older one, but I mean, it's something simple that you can create in-house, but it's something to visibly kind of mark out who's going to do what role. And it could be a simple thing like moving kits. It could be referral resources. So when you have an on-site residential service coordinator, It sometimes gets a little confusing for our lead PSH case management providers that might be third party that come on site or are planted. So it's really helpful to have these discussions. It's also great to understand, where the line is drawn for property management, because they manage so much in their day-to-day, what things rest with services that they don't need to hold or they shouldn't hold. And so this is a great way to kind of have that dialogue, have that processing as a group. And mind you, this doesn't mean this doesn't change. And it doesn't mean that it's not unique by site. So we've seen in different instances where certain providers like it a certain way and they adapt it to what serves them best on site. And it's a constant conversation and dialogue between Courtney's property management team, Hope Through Housing Services, so the residential services component, and then the PSH providers that come on site to do the intensive case management.
So if you guys work with me, I say communication is definitely key. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I don't think I've ever run into an instance where over communicating has caused any issues, especially when there's so many partners involved at one property. And so for us early on, we start off with the weekly check-ins. And so we have a lot of lease ups going on, and early on, setting expectations, the roles, you're able to do that during these weekly check-ins. You're able to get ahead of problems that, without these check-ins, they may become, there's small fire today, and the next thing you have a forest fire because you've skipped those weekly check-ins, the communication wasn't there, and things have escalated. And so usually the weekly check-ins are more of the on-site staff and the service provider. And then you have your monthly check-ins, and usually that's all hands on deck. So usually you have some of your upper management involved with those calls. And typically, if you can't work it out during the weekly check-in, during the monthly, you usually will get everything hashed out. And so these meetings should definitely be positive, and you go in there with an open mind. I don't think, any of us have completely figured out some of these processes. And so just the collaboration and being open to constructive criticism is key. So on-site teams should check in with the service provider frequently. And if you're on-site with your service provider, if they have an office, I would say, when you're grabbing your cup of coffee, just check in and say, hey, anything happen overnight or over the weekend? And the more you're able to create, a relationship and build trust with one another, it definitely, the residents are able to see that, and they're able to see that you guys are in a united front. And, things flow a lot smoother on these sites. And so sub meetings focused on retention, empowerment, intervention. And usually this is typically if you're running into issues with, let's just say, one resident, and it doesn't need to be a full blown meeting, but the property management services, you guys need to meet one-on-one and come up with a plan. If there's behavior issues, or even sometimes it can definitely be something positive. We've had one of our residents that he was able to get a job and wanted to come up with a savings plan. And it was a collaboration between, services and PM, seeing if we had any programs that we were aware of. So guys, communication is key on all ends. Next slide.
Can I add one thing?
Oh, yes, definitely.
So one thing I think both of us will definitely appreciate this one is document. Meaning when you have a meeting, follow up with a summary of that meeting, what you guys agreed on, your action items, because we all know all of us are pretty much maxed out. We're busy, we're handling multiple projects. So make it easy, make it like documented, memorialized that, so-and-so is going to follow up with action 1. And it's not necessarily micromanaging, it's helpful. It also helps us refer back and say, we've been dealing with this issue for months now. It's been since this date, and it gives you a timeline. It gives you areas of follow-up that are super helpful for both property management and services, but document all meetings.
Correct. And thank you, AJ, because that also prompted me to think about it. Usually ahead of time, you designate that one person that's going to take those notes for you. And so, and those notes should go out, honestly, right after the meeting. And then put someone in charge of just following up, just to make sure any action items from that meeting that they were followed up on. Because I see a lot to where in one meeting, you know, we agree to something and then we all get back to our day to day, and, you know, the craziness that can sometimes come up on sites. And then the next meeting, we're like, oh crap, we forgot to, you know, follow up on, you know, X, Y, and Z. So just make sure that someone's following up. And if that person is going to be out that takes your notes, have an alternate. So the property management perspective. So if you guys have been in property management for a while, you guys know it's been definitely a shift, a mindset shift. And so I tend to think as a property manager, you are the, I guess you can say the king or queen of your kingdom. And so whatever is going on, you're typically aware of it. You're, you know, making sure that everything is copacetic. And so I use that analogy because, you know, we're so used to being in charge. And so it was definitely a mind change when it came to the relationship between the service provider, property management, and having permanent supportive housing residents. And I would say one of the large, I guess, adjustment for me was our lease ups. So, and filling vacancy. So most of our sites, we have a site-based waiting list, unless you have some other funding sources, HUD, where you are getting referrals and things of that sort. But for permanent supportive housing, it's very similar to where you're working with your provider and they're pulling from CES, and you guys are having to communicate on when you have units available. And so the mindset change, it started early. And so again, just understanding each other's roles, housing retention. So most of the times we give out notices, and, you know, if the offense is, if it's severe enough, we are sending you to eviction. And so working with permanent supportive housing residents, it was, okay, I need to understand that there is going to be a housing retention plan put into place. I need to work with the provider on this and understand exactly, you know, what's in that plan and how do we hold the resident accountable together. And so reviewing policies and procedures. So guys, I can't stress this enough. Early on, please make sure that you're reading your tenant selection plans. And also, if you're a document, you know, nerd like me, an agreement nerd, please get into your regulatory agreements and your funding sources, because the further we move along, and I think a lot of you guys know, funding sources are definitely, it's scarce out there. So to fill the gap on a lot of these projects, we're having to, you know, piece together funding, which each funding has its own requirement. And so, as the property management team, you have to understand exactly what's on your property, those funding sources, even going as far as calculation of rents. And I've had a few learning experiences here within the last few weeks. And so just really understanding your properties, understanding the housing first model, what you can and cannot evict on, and your move-in process. So definitely we strive to have the case manager on site when we are doing a lease signing with our permanent supportive housing residents. And for two reasons. We want the case manager to also know the lease just as much as the resident, just so when it, you know, comes down to accountability, they know exactly, you know, what the resident should and should not be doing. But also the resident has already built the trust with their case manager. And so it just helps us being able to, you know, go through the lease signing and them having someone that they already trust right then and there as we begin to build the trust with them. And so the housing first, compare and contrast. So definitely I went to the books on this, took a lot of notes, and then tried to navigate this by myself. And then we actually had AJ come on the team, and I can't stress it enough, guys. You have to get an AJ on your team, just not our AJ. But she has definitely been instrumental to our success and helping us navigate through all of this, the rules, the regulations. And so, as you guys know, screenings and evictions and lease violations are a bit different when you have a resident that falls under the housing first model. And so, a little further along, we'll get to some of the myths and things that we hear a lot. But as you know, with housing first, there's limited things that you can evict on to definitely. I would say the number one goal is for housing retention. But at the end of the day, you can still do your noticing, guys. And so, and I can't stress that enough, that even though you can evict, you should be working with the service provider on the PM side to deliver those notices. For us, we try to meet with the case manager and the service provider ahead of time just to make sure they know exactly what we're going to be serving the resident for. And that way, when we're actually given the notice, they can help guide the resident and help us if at that time we are going to come up with a housing retention plan. But just because they fall under the housing first model does not mean that you cannot give out your normal property management notices. Okay, I just want to stress that because I see that often. And we're not evicting, but we are making them aware of some of the violations that they have done against the lease agreement. So next slide. And so at the end of the previous slide, I know it touched on just different tools, and I know we'll get into that a little later also, but motivational speaking and, motivational interviewing. I actually was meeting with a resident. It's been about a year and a half, and I didn't even know there was a term for what I was doing, but just really going in and just asking questions and understanding what took place. And that's basically the sum of the motivational interviewing. But just shared objectives is retention. I think if you're definitely in the affordable housing world, one of your missions, your internal missions, is to provide housing for families at a rate that they can afford it and have stability. And so clarity again just on the processes early on just for the residents and the providers, and early prevention processes. So you really just need to spell this out early on. Whenever you're opening up a property, even when you have a new manager taking over for a manager that has, left, I would say within the first few weeks, you want to sit down with the service provider and just get an understanding as to expectations and just bringing some clarity on those processes. The housing stability plan, again, you'll hear us touch on that. The service provider creates this plan, but property management serves a huge purpose with being able to provide input on this plan and just your regular check-in meetings. And so in going in with open mindset, and it's been an adjustment, definitely, I believe, for all of us. And I talk to my team a lot, and they're like, well, we didn't used to do it this way. And I'm like, yeah, it's a new day. So got to go in with an open mind and really understanding how to run your property with the new population. Next slide. So dispelling myths. And so me and AJ are going to tag team this one. And so a lot of things that we hear, whether it's while we are at work, while we're in the field, while we're shopping, I get approached a lot with my core logo on my shirts when I'm out. But, as a property management company, affordable property management company, and also service providers, you guys should be advocates for the populations that you serve. And so whenever I hear any myths, I definitely try to throw in the education piece. And so a lot of times our PSH residents are deemed as being bad people. They're all bad people. I don't want them in my neighborhood. We also hear they're dangerous, they're violent, can't be trusted around minors. and a lot of times drugs have contributed to them being homeless and on the streets. And I'll let AJ touch on the last three, but you never know someone's story. And so just because they fall under, I would say the permanent supportive housing category, it does not make them different than anyone else that's living on your sites. And so, or that's just, in an apartment complex community, nothing makes them different other than, they may have hit a bad patch. They may experience mental health issues, but at the end of the day, we are all human. And so it's crazy, some of the comments I hear. And so we thought it would be great just to put this up here, just in case we have anyone that's tuning in and just, would like to understand or be able to get some guidance on how to respond back to some of these things. But no, so I look at it as though, resident A, resident B, I don't care what they're designated as, they're still human. And we can all be under the influence of drugs. We could have all been homeless. And so, so you just never know someone's story, just to sum it up. And so AJ, I'll let you touch on the last three.
So I think I'm just going to highlight the fact that, for instance, our internal boot camp, we really focus on learning our own bias. We self-reflect on how we associate our own backgrounds to people, to things, to other experiences. And all humans have complex needs that, present themselves in different ways, and journeys are all different. Things that we really worked hard on is using for the PSH language is to really redirect that language to permanent supportive housing referred, like not identifying the units, particularly to the population or the experience. So we're working through that language shift in the sense of how we address folks, because it's a shift. We're used to saying, in our minds when we're organizing a lease up, we're like PSH units, non-PSH units. So we're working on ways that we can evolve that over time. But again, change, what does it take? 5 years on average for true change to implement. So it's a conversation, it's education, it's self-awareness. And a lot of what we have our director of DEI go through at the boot camps is really having people self-reflect. And sometimes some of the feelings that come from even services staff, other residents come from folks' past history, own traumas. Someone might remind them of their aunt. So we have that transference piece coming through. And it's like, how do we make sure folks are aware of it? And realize that a lot of these myths that are here are often stemming from things like that or fear. So how do we educate? How do we create self-awareness in everything we do?
Correct. Thank you. And so, actually just being on site and speaking to some of our residents, it's been mind blowing just how, today they, great job, great family, and, life is good. And then tomorrow lose their job and everything just spirals out of control. And, next thing they know, they're on the streets, and now they're a part of our program. And so you just never know someone's history, their background. And just by, having those conversations, you meet some amazing people and that have done some amazing things in this world. And so, so I empower all of you guys just to be able to educate others just on the different populations that you serve on your sites and in your organizations. So next slide, AJ.
Can I add one thing? You just made me think of it, the way you said. Going back to data and using data to guide and move away from assumptions, I think is really powerful. So for example, if you have a site that had someone, maybe a PSH referred unit or PSH as a whole site, and someone had an incident with unauthorized guests and the unit got flooded and it was a major insurance claim. Folks naturally see the dollar signs, naturally see the big events. Whereas when Courtney and we're talking about how it's really common in general population families that kids put stuff down the toilets, and that's a consistent kind of issue, but the cost might equate to the same. So really using that data to create a common understanding of reality versus assumptions. Because unfortunately, we're a sensationalist type of human being. We're like, wow, this is a big event, this is it. Versus those consistent things that are kind of like sleepers that add up and equate to the same costs on a consistent basis. So again, going back to these myths, to dispel them, have your way internally to create, that data, that understanding, that true reflection versus assumption for the property management development side, in choice making and how we approach stuff. Because that definitely, I feel like Courtney and I, and please chime in on this one, it's helped us when we communicate things or we push back on things.
Yes, I definitely agree.
Okay, service provider perspective. And some of this we did cover last time, so but I do see a lot of new names. So I will definitely make it a little higher level, and we'll move towards our cases at the end. But permanent supportive housing essentially is indefinite affordability, safety, comfort. We ensure quality housing, nothing subpar, services that are accessible, flexible, target residential stability, meaning if someone has a different sleeping pattern or works through a shift, we figure out ways to accommodate to ensure that they have the same equal access to our services. It might be super early in the morning, it might be shifting someone's schedule to late at night, but we make it work as a team. Empowerment, independence, no one is conserved. So folks have free will, free choice to engage. It's our job on the services end and property management to get creative, use motivation or interviewing, find ways that are motivating. We found ways such as reconnecting with children or family members is a reason to stay housed. Or a simple thing, get a pet or garden, whatever the motivator is, finding those key things, because that truly helps push the conversation forward ongoing. But a lot of indefinite wraparound supports and affordability and flexibility. So I like to show this picture because for folks that are coming in from being chronically homeless, street homeless, even from a shelter situation where you put your arm out, you can touch the next bed essentially. It's a change, it's an acclimation to a new space. But also thinking about from the property management experience, I feel like all trained to kind of think a model apartment or what's on a movie or TV show, what it should look like. And the reality is it's probably somewhere in the middle. Not all units are going to look like the right. I think a lot of us with children and pets and other things, our homes don't look like the right. So we have to have that ability to understand that lens in which we're looking through and our expectation level from the services end to the property management end. Did you want to add anything to this, Courtney?
No, most of you guys probably complete your annual inspections. And so it's been a shift also just to on the property management side. When we go in, we definitely look for health and safety issues, but I would say we also have taken on looking for hoarding and things of that sort. So when you guys are walking your units, please make sure that you do note hoarding situations and you let the service provider know right away, just because they can help you and assist you with having the resident get the correct help they need to be able to thin out those items. But we all know that the unit is not going to look, as AJ said, like a model unit. So we have to take that into consideration. And as long as we don't see, the hoarding, holes in the walls, things damaged, we should be okay with moving forward on with the inspection. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Definitely. And it's supporting the acclimation of like change and patterns, meaning if you're on the left and, there's just a dumpster right there, or you can throw it in a pile and it gets picked up and cleaned up, that was normal. And that was something that you did. And that was part of your pattern. So having to create new
Yep, I think that.
And then here, I like to show this, just looking at community, also thinking about the sense of, when you are street homelessness or even within interim housing or shelters, you have that community, you have that neighbor right next door to you, or that person you can always go chat with that's always on the bench to the right, or the tent to the left. And there's something very comforting about that. And that's part of survival. And that's part of feeling whole as a human being. And so with unaccompanied or unauthorized guests, it's a process. It's also being mindful of maybe that's the person that kept them safe at night. Maybe that was a person that always told them where to go for food or had their back when they needed it most. So having that level of empathy and awareness in the sense doesn't mean that they can violate their lease. It means that we have to work through that, but we have that level of empathy and awareness of the situation, of the importance of maybe that person that they tried to accommodate for in that unit. But they have to understand that piece that could put their housing at risk.
AJ, I think maybe the internet, it keeps freezing up just a little bit. But I just wanted to throw out also on the service provider end, typically you guys are having interactions with the residents a bit much, more than us on the property management side. And so it's been beneficial with some of our partners when they're meeting with them, actually going to the units and having those conversations at the units, and they're able to, report back to us just the conditions of the unit. Because typically we're going in, during our annual inspections, and things can happen, escalate within that year. So service providers, I give you a bit of homework. Just if you guys can meet with the residents at their unit, just put some eyes on the units. And during your check-ins, if there's any red flags, bringing them up to the team. And if they're huge red flags, please report it back to property management right away. So just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, so next is just a quick visual. It's a simple one, meaning you could make it way more pretty. But essentially it just shows how everybody's codependent on each other in the sense of ideally we have the same baseline knowledge, the same baseline approach. That doesn't always happen. So, ensuring that the communication of expectations and roles and responsibilities, like we've echoed throughout, but looking at the right dosage of services, best partnerships for the type of project for that external contracted provider. Some are dictated by funding, like No Place Like Home. You get dictated behavioral health partners, which is great. They're phenomenal. And then Hope Through Housing for us, property management, having well-trained team members for coordination, consistency, and echoing messaging, finding family entities, rep payees, IHSS, other supportive elements to create pillars of support to literally wrap around that person. And mind you, all those things about communication are constantly pinging in between all these parties. It never stops. So it's constant, it's clear, and it's documented. One of the things we do on the services end is have case conferencing. So by region, we set up live case conferencing where people, including property management, can bring up certain cases. We can do a one-on-one or we have group ones by region, depending on if it's a consistent one or one that has more intensive need. And we go through the cases. We review where we could have intervention, where we could work with the provider. It could also be managing rolling vacancies and things like that. But we definitely use these to ensure that we're intervening, we're coordinating between our teams, and we ensure the most expedited, organized care for folks as needed. And then this is just a visual. I like it because it kind of highlights how we weave in, or rather property management weaves in services. So there might be, hopefully you guys can see my mouse. This is an example of unauthorized guests. We might note from one of the entities in those circles that there's an unauthorized guest in the unit. It could be an inspection, a visit, who knows, could be dropping off coffee. But an investigation to ensure that, that is in fact occurring. Repairs, property walks could catch it as well. Just to confirm, because we can all have assumptions, but again, we will want to document and confirm. A resident violation of unauthorized guests is issued. Property management threads in the services right away to ensure that everybody's involved, like Courtney mentioned. Folks coordinate, plan to meet with the providers, and then as well as then bring in the resident to figure out a plan collectively to support them to mitigate those issues. And they can work through the retention plan, work through those steps associated to it, and then shape that realistic remedy. And sometimes it's a process. So like we know hoarding, that's a process. That's a clinical need of intervention. It's a process of organizing what that looks like for their unique needs. And then obviously when it's remedied or close to remedied to satisfaction, so the violation is no longer standing, we monitor it, we check in, we do food drop-offs, drop off coffee to ensure that that unit's doing well in relationship to this example. But it pretty much can be echoed across all examples. And again, document. So you have a clear timeline of how things have occurred, interventions that have been made, ongoing. And then ideally this ends in retention of the resident. And then as Courtney alluded to earlier, We have a intervention form. So we work with party A, which is property management. They step out of the room after we review the violation and see what needs to be remedied. So the violation, can be resolved. Part B is when we bring in the partnerships to collectively resolve on the services end, a resolution, a way of supporting them, could be education, coaching, you name it, and essentially set a timeline of reconvening, follow-up, etc. But it's all memorialized in a document. There is one additional form that's not shown here that gets filed with property management to show the meeting took place, that property management shared it with us, and that we have a follow-up date that they have on file. So it's just one form, no details of clinical need, no details of all of the steps, because that's kept separate. But they get a simple form that just notes for this unit, this violation, coordination is occurring and follow-up will happen on such date. Let's see. So service providers educate and lease up expectations. Courtney educates the teams on what's expected for the services end. Regular PM provider check-ins, on-site case management coordination. We have pre and post retention tools. As I mentioned, document communication. And again, I'll re-highlight document, because that is your best friend for following up for if eviction has to happen for safety reasons, for something that just cannot be resolved. The documentation is very helpful to have. It justifies our attempts. It shows that we really tried to do our best, and maybe what is a more appropriate level of care. It could be medical need for a higher level of care, and so forth. And then the housing stability plan. This happens actually ideally either right before or as someone moves into their housing. I just pulled up an example. I think this one's from LASA, if I remember correctly. Yes. But it's just basically building upon the person's strengths. So we know folks have strengths, some people have weaknesses. We're composed of a multitude of different things. So really mapping that out so they can be empowered, build upon their strengths, have things in place in advance. So if maybe they are hard of hearing and they love music. So what can you do in advance that that they won't get a violation and you're supporting them in their tendency? Headphones. So maybe they play music, figure out headphones. But that way you're not hindering their quality of life, but you're also helping them adapt to their new space with a neighbor above them, to the sides and below. And things like that. But definitely looking at a housing stability plan helps kind of guide that conversation, that process with the provider end, the service provider end, to ensure that they, one, can be a good resident, and two, have a really thriving life in their unit. And then identifying in that is barriers, like I mentioned, steps to mitigate it, client strengths, steps to build on those strengths, available resources. An example, kind of going back to the strengths, is someone might be a talker. They might want to know what everything is happening on site. And I think we all have residents like that, and they mean well, and they're social. But they might be a great person to lead for like the tenant advisory board. They might be good to have to lead for the neighborhood watch committee. So I would say build upon those strengths and keep folks busy. Idle hands are the worst. So really looking into ways to keep people involved and feeling useful and active and using those strengths in some way, shape, or form. And then have consistent home visits, inspections, especially at those earlier months, to ensure that things are kind of set in place and that they understand what's expected of them early on. It's not just here, drop your stuff on the unit and buy. No, let's talk about this consistently. Let's have a conversation. Do you have enough food? Do you know where the laundry is? Do you need help with your laundry card? All those things matter and very intensive in that first 6 to 12 months. Dynamic between third-party service provider. So it happens between all phases of the development, but all leads to coordination between property management, services, ongoing. So the development phase, we review what partner is the best, for the location, who has all the best menu of services. We set clear expectations of what we expect from them, things like MOUs or contracts. At the development project meeting, we touch base on things like that. Lease up, we're like glued at the hip. Services and property management should be so in sync, it's seamless. So we're there side by side with the clients. We're there side by side with our third party providers. Property management feels supported, services feel supported. We give each other feedback, we course correct. And these lease up coordination meetings are key for that as well. If you're working with No Place Like Home, you're probably working with entities like CSH and other folks like that, that also have their crosswalks on top of that. Post lease up, ongoing coordination, making sure you're doing case conferencing, addressing those tenancy violations or precursors to that. So how could we be coaching someone to be successful? Annual collaborative review, bi-directional, Courtney and I have had many meetings like that where we're like, this would really help if we had more of this, more presence on these days. And they alter things. We kind of negotiate back and forth, and it's a fluid process. Ongoing referrals for only vacancies, making sure those are flowing. Because just on the services end, whether you're a third party or you're referring into those units, we want to ensure we respect the development, the gift of the development, the gift of those front doors. That we ensure that we're doing our best to fill those units as fast as possible, because it's a balance, right? We get those front doors that we so desperately need, but we also have to understand that there's risk for the developer. There's pressure on property management to fill those units, and any type of reserve for development. Log of findings from annual reviews to find patterns, objectives for improvement and quality, and tracking data. We're going to keep highlighting data, because that data is what's going to guide your ship for that particular project, for those particular partners ongoing. Did you want to add anything, Courtney?
I do. So, and thank you, AJ. So when we get to the lease up portion of things, guys, I just want you guys all to understand that no matter what lease up I've worked on, things are a bit crazy. And so I say that because we all have strict deadlines that we have to meet. And so it's definitely, it's beneficial on all ends. Just the communication part, going over the units that need to be filled, getting live updates on referrals, just because, as you guys probably know, there are funding deadlines. And if we don't hit those deadlines, then at that point, we're losing money. And so, so you will see a huge push on the property management side, on the development side, to get these units filled. And so we're collaborative, but you will see during lease ups, things are just a bit crazy. And so we definitely need the help of everyone to be able to fill these units and obtain referrals just in a timely manner. And even on the property management side, communicating right away when you're processing that paperwork and you get a denial, letting the service provider know right away so they can start working on a different referral. And typically it's income. So sometimes we do. Most of our units are at a 30% set aside. And so you do have where we get an applicant and they are over income. And so just being able to communicate that right away, it helps out on both ends. And even post lease ups, when we know that we're going to unfortunately have to go ahead and terminate tenancy, just everyone working on a strategy plan ahead of time to get that the new unit filled. And I completely understand that when it comes on the referral side, that unit has to be vacant before you guys can pull a new referral. But at least the wheels will be rolling behind the scenes and plans put into place on filling the unit. So definitely it's a collaboration, and a lot of our funding sources are becoming a lot more strict with units being held vacant and not getting a referral right away. So and I know we have a huge pipeline of people out there that really need the housing. So just on both ends, being able to really push and get those units filled. So just wanted to add that.
No, that's perfect. Because honestly, this piece, these phases of development and service partners being involved is so imperative how we function ongoing. So setting the tone right, setting that communication pathway ongoing. I think it also lends the fact that providers feel like they're part of the process and their ownership of like picking their office space and things like that, which all equates to happier staff, better services, collectively all doing really well. So we wanted to add a couple areas to ensure early involvement, to ensure retention supports, development, deal structures, and funding designs that are realistic. Don't set yourself up for failure. If you're really looking at collaborativeness between property management, they can do all their role, but if the design of it isn't like ideal, or it's so heavy in need for supports but not adequate supports, I would say take a step back and relook at how the design is, because that dictates your experience, right? So Courtney and I have 100% PSH site, but not ideal services. If you're in the development arm, create that balance so then the equation can flow. We can do our pieces of the puzzle. We can all make it work together. And then structural design of the building to successes and retention. I just put some notes on here that Courtney and I, we comment on designs before they actually come to fruition. So we comment on where the mail is located, because that's a good catch spot. If you're looking for someone who's avoiding you, the mail is a good spot because people want their mail or their Amazon packages. So the walk flow of foot traffic to services, community engagement spaces, lighting. There's psychology of aesthetics. So the colors, there's no joke that there's, pale mint green, typically in dental offices and hospitals. Folks tend to stay away from reds and oranges and a couple other colors. So be mindful of all those little details, and where property management office is located, your safety, expectations for those rooms, camera locations, like all of that. Because again, happy staff equates to really good services overall consistently. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, just when it comes to, early on being able to provide that feedback, when it comes to entrances and exits and community room flow, and it's huge. And if our staff feels supported, usually that will help us not only with resident retention, but with staff retention, because you guys all know having to hire and start with someone new, it definitely puts a delay on the progress that you're able to make on these sites. So just wanted to throw that in, just being communicating early on these projects.
Definitely. And one last thing on here is just seek other funding sources for the supportive services, meaning at our San Diego locations, we decided to go for HUD CLC funding, where we have someone focused purely on retention that floats across our sites with PSH units. We did that strategically because we know, especially during pandemic, post-pandemic, it's a shift in staffing. We knew retention of staff was hard at the beginning, even before the pandemic. But it's a challenge, and folks are still kind of recovering, and there is still burnout there. The field itself has burnout. So having the ability to have additional layer of support, someone that can float across the site, coordinate connectivity, document things. So it's not the service provider, third party having to do it, the property management, the person does it. They follow up, and through additional funding, we're able to create that extra layer of support. Someone who can come in and spend the time, coordinate, navigate that, work with property management. And it helps, especially for behavioral health county programs. Sometimes they're short staffed, even PACE programs, other types of programs. There's times where they don't have enough staff to spread across all the sites. And it's just the nature of the work sometimes, and it comes in waves. So this is a good fallback. So this slide is our transition slide to our case studies. This partnership can be very successful as it equates to retention, increasing quality of life. So we really wanted to highlight some real life examples. Obviously, names have changed, photos are not real. I don't know, Courtney, do you want to kick off this one?
Sure. So we're going to call this resident Mr. H. And so, guys, we're very realistic. We're, transparent. Not every day is going to be a walk in the park. So you guys are going to hit those hurdles. And it's how you guys navigate through, those trying times. It definitely plays a key piece to the outcome of those events. And so Mr. H, he damaged his unit. And I will say we went through a series of events with this resident. We ended up having to go in, completely replace the appliances, in a way, fully renovate the unit, establish a coordination pathway with the provider helping him. And during the time that the work was being done on his unit, we ended up relocating him off-site, and working with the service provider was definitely a team effort. And at one point we did have conversation about going ahead and ending tenancy, or coming up with a housing retention plan should he go back into interim housing. And so, guys, just to let you know, and in a perfect world, what we like to see is we're presented with an issue and on the property management side, and we go with the service provider and we come up with a plan. And so if that housing retention plan or any plan we put into place is not working, and we do feel as though we are going to head down the eviction path, we actually love to work hand in hand with the provider to go ahead and relocate the resident maybe into interim housing. That way we're not having to go down the path of lockouts and, courts and legal. If our, service team can help us with relocating the resident, early on, that is like the perfect plan for us. And so in this case, we ended up keeping him at the site. A great, amazing team helped us with adjusting his medication. And we decided as a team, we were going to do regular check-ins on the unit just to make sure it did not take place again, internal case conferencing, and definitely coordinating with the property management team and the case management team, improving the communication with this resident. And so definitely was a huge team effort. He was able to stay on site. It was more of an extreme case because there was a lot of damages in the unit. And again, as a team, we did hold a meeting just to discuss what the next plan of action was going to be. So definitely the ending turned out well with his new medication. His behavior issues definitely calmed all the way down. So we'll go ahead and go to the next case study. And I'll give this to AJ.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. So this example is a unique one because we often, for senior sites, we work with different entities that provide wraparound services. They're very comprehensive, but there are times when, sometimes the choice to age in place is not an ideal option. So in this example, Mr. J, obviously not real photo or name, aging needs. Overall, just aging needs more support and care. ADLs and housekeeping are a little bit more unique because they're quadriplegic. So meaning they don't feel anything from the waist down. They cannot use the remote for their TV. They cannot pick up a glass to get water. So they are 100% codependent on other people helping him survive in his unit. Working with the service provider is key to ensure that's occurring. One can assume they're signed up with this provider. They say it's taken care of. But there are times when you drop off groceries or things like that, you're like, so it's good to take a little deeper dive just to see how everything is lining up. In-home supportive services are great. They're not necessarily to medical level, meaning they can provide some things, but they cannot provide all. Financial, ensuring that process is clear, that there's no fiduciary abuse happening and things like that from the service perspective. Medical needs, using APS in a positive way. I know a lot of people have negative feelings about APS, but there are some really great positives from filing things. One, it documents it. Two, if there's enough space and place and the equation's just right, you're able to access a lieu of other funding and services in some areas. So don't always look at APS as a bad thing. I can hold accountability, whether it be the family member that's managing the money, whether it's the entity that's supposed to be managing the care. Collectively, it puts things out on the table and someone else, a third party, comes in and assesses what needs to be done. So it's very, very helpful in that sense. Ensuring safety, making sure people can evacuate, or there's someone to evacuate an individual like this. Even an unauthorized guest could be a simple thing where they had someone staying with them on a regular reoccurring basis that becomes an unauthorized guest. So really coordinating those efforts for around the clock care with property management to avoid risking someone getting a violation for their housing. So some of the things that we executed was evaluating the unit safety. Someone who's quadriplegic obviously will have different ADLs, meaning do they have the systems in place to allow them to survive in their unit and have a quality of life? Meaning, can they access water? Do they have assistance to go to the bathroom? Can they access, the TV if that's like their preferred entertainment? Do they have adequate airflow? You name it. Bathing, hygiene, all the things you guys listed as those things that each person needs, we ensure that we look at that. And to enhance that increased coordination. Sometimes, unfortunately, supervisors don't know all the details of their in-field staff. So it's bringing it to the table, laying it out, and having an honest conversation. And sometimes those are tough, sometimes they're uncomfortable, but to ensure one, we're protecting that resident, but two, in the sense that, we're also, protecting, the integrity of programs and other things along with that, to ensure we're providing things that people need is key. And then we did file an APS report, which did trigger evaluation of what's going on. That's separate from us. We might assume things, just like we mentioned before, but having someone else come in and look at the data and look at the situation and then give their course correction suggestions or next steps is key, because it shouldn't just be one person's point of view. It should be collective. It should be comprehensive. And then prevention needs, we do regular check-in with the residents. So it could be the RSC side, the third-party service provider. Property management might drop off, something that they have in the office for them, because sometimes they drop off nice little things for residents, but have that constant contact, internal case conferencing, making sure we're reviewing the case. We have one violation currently for that unauthorized guest. So figuring out how do we make that legit? How do we make sure we align with the lease requirements and, support this provider in trying to create that all around the clock care? Because we don't want to be punitive just for the sake of enforcing a lease. We want to figure out ways to have a solution so this person can try to be independent as much as possible. In some cases, there might be a need to move to higher level of care and push and advocate. But this is a really good example where there are cases that might come up. It could be dementia, it could be Alzheimer's, other things like that, where it's a safety risk. If that person doesn't have around the clock care for evacuations, for self-care, for eating, drinking, and things like that. So definitely a case that's going to come up more and more as folks are aging in place or moving into your senior housing.
So what does success look like? Example C. And so this is going to be Miss K. And so early on during this presentation, I touched on the motivational interviewing. And so we had a resident at our site that unfortunately, she decided to partake in some activities that resulted in the property being vandalized. And also the office being broken into. And so, on the property management side, we reviewed the footage and we decided to get together with the service provider and a few other partners that are involved with this property and sit down and have a conversation with her just to understand what took place during this situation. And so during this process, I engaged in motivational interviewing with the resident and, just asking those questions, open-ended questions just to see, did she voluntarily, act with the individuals? Is there anything that maybe we should know and things of that sort? And so in the end, I believe, we all want the success story where the resident stays at the site, but that's not always going to be the case. And I think all parties involved, we all want housing retention, but when that's not going to be the end result, we have to work together on coming up with a solution, whether it's interim housing or going the route of eviction. And so we actually did present her with the option of moving back to interim housing, and she accepted. And so I think she understood that unfortunately the surrounding areas around the property held some individuals that she had past relationships with, and just being at the site probably would just not be good for her. And so we established coordination pathways with an external lead service provider, and then also the internal service provider working at the on the site. And so a change in location of housing to prohibit reoccurring behavior. So we did end up moving her to an interim housing in a completely different city. And I have to give major kudos to our on-site team and also the provider that helped relocate her to this site. It was tough. A lot of emotions that day, but the team did an amazing job, and we believe that she'll be successful going through the program. So internal case conferencing activities to complete during the day. That was one of the things that she did bring up, is you know, wish there was a lot more activities on site. That way it would keep her from engaging in certain activities and with certain individuals. And so that was one thing that we did take into consideration, and did start to have different activities on site, you know, aside from the ones that we were already completing. And so, and in the end, it was relocation back to interim housing. And so maybe not the success story that we all view as being success from the housing retention side, but it was definitely a success. Not having to go the legal route and eviction route. We were able to relocate her ahead of time and find her housing that fit where she was currently and in her stage of life. So that's Miss K.
And Courtney, just to add, I think sometimes we assume what's ideal for someone. And I remember probably about 10 years ago, there was an individual that got this beautiful 1-bedroom, a balcony, and she stayed for a while. She did her best, and she tolerated it, in quotes. But she actually preferred living in an SRO. That was her place that she was most comfortable with. So eventually she moved back to an or the SRO. And it was a place that she chose, she was comfortable with, and she's still there. So the reality is what we think is ideal might not always be someone else's ideal. I think the biggest thing for all of us that are advocates and, you know, folks, that we don't want people homeless. So if we can find a way that it might be transferring to a different level of care, a different setting, whatever meets their needs at that time, and obviously what we can secure. So the next one, I cannot attest that I did this work at all. It was Stephanie on the San Diego team who actually traveled for this one because she knew the individual from years of work prior in a different region. And Mr. G, he had aging needs. He, you know, had a harder time doing laundry, a harder time, you know, organizing his home, sweeping, cleaning, clearing out moldy stuff in his fridge, and just some naturally occurring things that happen with all of us. Pests, there were some pests, bed bugs, due to not cleaning things out, bringing stuff in from the outside. And then engagement, sometimes there was avoidance, and then medical needs that, you know, obviously when you start opening or unraveling the onion, and you get someone connected to care, you're going to start to see things come abreast. So actions executed, we worked collectively and using trauma-informed care, cleared out the infested unit from clutter. And mind you, he had so many memories in that unit, meaning from his music days, of the past, and being really mindful, not just to toss stuff around. That alone could create crisis and trigger someone. Pictures of his wife, things that meant a lot to him. So really understanding and having him teach us what mattered to him, how we should handle it, and using that as a guidance. Stephanie and the team were amazing at this process. It took time. It didn't happen overnight. And sometimes it can't happen in phases of purging, cleaning, and so forth. Working side by side with property management, who was on the same page, same understanding, same approach, treated for bed bugs and pests. So we had someone come in and do that. Replace the broken appliances that were never reported, things like that. You know, maybe they broke over the last month and nothing was reported. So this was a great opportunity to go in there and get fresh things, maybe inspire the space, refresh it. Worked with a local nonprofit that provides furniture. So we replaced a lot of furniture that got infested. Bed bugs love to burrow in wood. So we opted for some other options, fresh options that were not ideal spaces for bed bugs. We framed award-winning albums, ensured his late wife's items were protected throughout the process, honored his history. We made sure to really have conversations and build his self-esteem throughout it. It wasn't embarrassing. We wanted to create a space that, you know, it was as, again, trauma-informed as possible. It's always uncomfortable to have your unit cleaned or treated, even a repair, having someone come in, but we tried to do it the best way we possibly could. We established pathways for coordination ongoing. External lead service provider was provided, and constant communication with them for updates. Same with property management, kind of tapping each other's shoulder. Hey, you want to check in so-and-so? You know, noticed he wasn't coming on his unit, like just ways that we can help support as a community. for a person. Establish connections to meal programs, food delivery, local senior center, some prevention needs, regular check-ins, like I mentioned, internal case conferencing, check-ins, communication with CM and PM team, IHSS, making sure that's in place, regularly scheduled treatments for bed bugs and pests. So that's regular volcanoes to monitor if there's a new infestation. And then community as a whole, he's a very long-time resident. So the community as a whole is like a family in that sense, and they watch out for him. So having that beautiful built community over years and years of being neighbors. And definitely someone did put in the chat about communicating with each other. Obviously there's boundaries and limits to what we share with property management and vice versa. But there's some pieces we can, because we have release of informations or MOAs with each entity. So know that those are in place to allow us to have some fluidity in coordination of care. Doesn't mean that Courtney's team is going to know the dosage of his meds, the clinical needs, the diagnosis, any of that stuff. For their purposes, they want to know, how does the person get back on track? Is there a plan?
Correct.
That's it.
And guys, on the property management side, we know, we like to know a lot, but just not that much. That's something that we don't need to know when it comes down to medication and things of that sort. So guys, I know before we open it up for Q&A, there was just a few tips that I would just like to throw out there, a few things that we've been able to be, that have caused us to be successful. So on your sites, we all know with our permanent supportive housing residents, a lot of times we have to provide the furniture. And so if you guys can set up some type of reserve to where you're putting money into that reserve on a yearly basis, well, monthly basis preferably, but maybe even at the end of the year, if your properties are cash flowing, just move some money aside to that reserve, just so you are able to keep up with the furniture replacements in these units, and then just open communication, having, sometimes it's difficult conversations with the service provider, and even, vice versa, service provider having those conversations with property management on, performance shortcomings, things that you guys can improve on, just to be able to help better serve our residents. So just want to throw those out there, and hopefully this presentation has been beneficial to you all. AJ?
So I believe Scamp is going to be leading the questions for us, so we'll stand by.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks so much. So first question is, how do you deal with language and cultural differences that might make it difficult to communicate with residents?
Trainings.
On our end, we put together an LEP plan, and so we have translation services on demand. So if you go into our office, we'll have a flyer with a number that you can contact, and you're able to call right then and there and get provided translation services. So that's been helpful for us, just because we have a vast array of languages spoken at our sites, and we do want to make sure that we are able to communicate effectively with all of our residents. So I would suggest maybe getting with someone within your organization and setting something up similar.
Great. And you guys had a slide with steps about lease violations, and someone was asking about whether there's, situations where you might skip steps.
Of course. So there might be situations where stuff's already in the works. Maybe attempts already happening, and we don't need to go through that whole process. We still will document what that looks like, but perhaps they're very close to a third party provider, and they would prefer only to work with them. It might trigger them or be too vulnerable for them to be working with a couple people, or even it might be just overwhelming. So whatever accommodations, whatever we can do to make that experience supportive, something that resolves the tenancy violation, we tag team with property management to shape shift along with that. So it never looks the same for each person.
And on the topic of design considerations, as National Core future proofs its assets and thinks about focusing on people and fostering a place of healing, is there something that in your mind would really improve health outcomes when it comes to design? And if so, what would it be?
Windows.
Windows.
Windows, light.
Even just setting up a space for a resident garden. I don't think in the beginning, it's not too much. It's, it's a plot of land and some dirt, but our residents do amazing, things when they are able to plant and see the growth. And I honestly believe it helps promote, growth within them and to be able to watch something grow. So a resident garden, definitely. And like AJ said, windows, lighting, it definitely plays an effect just on health.
And just thinking about if you are welcoming folks that have experienced chronic homelessness, fresh air is so key. So if you've been sleeping outside for a long period of time, to have that free flowing air at night, that crisp air, crisp morning air, that's going to make it a little bit more normal for you. If it's not, you're not going to want to be in that unit. It's going to feel like a tight box around you. It's not going to feel like home. So we really found that having that airflow, the windows, and not always just like a thermostat, but having like the windows and like the natural light to actually feel like it's a connectivity between outside. I know, Courtney, a lot of the sites, like you said with the garden, have the garden, and then they also have like courtyard space. So if they want to go outside and like sit under a pergola or, an area to connect with each other or be solo and read, they have that ability to be outside the unit too. It's not like you're stuck in the unit in the design as well. And then most of the community rooms, the doors all fold open to like an outdoor space, most of them, the newer ones. So we have the ability to create like outdoor, indoor space for one, if we have another wave of COVID, please no. But it also allows this open space of fresh air and natural light to the community spaces where activities and all of that happen.
Are reasonable accommodation requests covered on an ROI? Meaning if a resident requests help from case management, who is a contracted partner on their reasonable accommodation request to property management, is this covered under the ROI?
So it's kind of two separate processes. So when we form a partnership with, let's say during the development stage with a partner, let's say behavioral health county entity, there's an MOU with strict policies, communication standards, email standards, all of that comes into play. We also have release of information signed, even from Hope's End and all ends, and essentially protecting each party and allowing that resident to choose. And they can always revoke things. That's always, part of it. But in relationship to an RA, that's a separate process. I mean, that's helping them get through that property management process. And I will hand that over to Courtney.
Correct. And so usually with our RAs, we work hand in hand with the provider to actually complete the RA. And so it's actually done with both parties. So not too long ago, we actually needed to fill out an RA. We had our resident come in and PM and the service provider help the resident fill out the RA. And so it's usually done in conjunction. And so for us, yes, it is covered under that ROI, and especially because we're doing it together.
And just to add one thing to that, a little data, a data drop the mic moment. But that's also someplace that can influence your development side. The RAs obviously aggregate, no names. You can look at patterns for sites and populations. So as you're developing new projects, because I see some developers on here as well, you can start to use that to influence your design. Meaning you can say 80% of the people in this building that are seniors want a grab bar. Correct. Well, then instead of having the aftermath cost for Courtney's end and her budget, why don't we install it right away? So you have cool opportunities for data from both ends.
And we've actually completed resident surveys also just to see what's beneficial. So we get so many requests about walk-in showers. So should our next development include walk-in showers? And what's the percentage of residents actually requesting? And so the more data that you're able to get on your existing properties, it could definitely be beneficial on your new properties. Yardi plays a part, property management plays a part. So definitely utilizing both tools helps out the developer.
And someone here notes that they are running into, so they're mentioning that they're running into third-party service providers that do not look beyond being an advocate for the resident so that they can retain their housing. Have you run into this, and how have you worked with partners like that to achieve the process and goals that you have established?
I think we all have. I think in this case, and I know Courtney's laughing because it happens, here and there. And, the intention there is good. It's solid. You want to be a good human. You want to advocate for a person. But that's going back to the Courtney slides of knowing that there's competing objectives, figuring out how we thread with a common purpose. Meaning you and I might want something, till we're blue in the face. But the reality is it going to affect something else, or does it hurt the other end? So really looking at our advocacy as ways to find that middle ground, being strategic, ensuring that the resident gets what they need, but also understand like where the limitations and objectives rest with property management end, because you can't have both. It's just the reality. They have regulations to follow. I mean, I'm sure Courtney, you can add a lot of context to that piece.
Correct. So thank you. So yes, we've had experience with this. And so definitely what comes into play is the education piece, and really going over, property management protocols. And typically if it's extreme behavior when property management wants to move forward with an eviction typically, and the service provider is saying no. So we also gather the information of how it's not only affecting the staff, but the surrounding residents, and how now it's affecting, and it could potentially affect the community. So I think it's just coming together during those check-ins and really being able to have those crucial conversations on how, property management has to operate in a certain, fashion. And at a certain point, not only do we want resident retention, but we have to take into consideration the property as a whole. And that's where we've been successful at navigating through those difficult situations, and the provider not wanting to maybe escalate the action. But in the end, there has to be some type of common ground, and whether it's, hey, property management will work with you on getting them into interim housing. We won't go to the eviction route, but there has to be a give and take during those scenarios.
And one thing to add, sorry, Courtney. But one thing to add is when Courtney and I talked about the development side, like that's your chance at the very early stages to really see if it's a good fit, to see like how their other sites function. Have you worked with them before? Because we know that there's some entities that are really like strong advocates, which is good, right? It's a good, place to be advocates, but seeing if it's a good fit for your development, good fit for your teams, because it's kind of like you interview each other at the very beginning. You want to see if it's a good fit for the project, the location, the amenities, like all of that at the very start.
Great.
And also, I just want to throw out there that we have run into different providers that we worked with that they're great with this population, but with this property with a different population, not so great. So just getting references also, even if it's a provider that you've worked with, but just with, different populations, just seeing, their experience with the new population they would be working with, because maybe that relationship is great over there, but not so much over here. So just want to throw that out there.
Great. Well, thank you both. We are at time. So I want to thank you so much for giving your time and helping us with this webinar. I'm sure people found it really helpful. We are going to share out the slides and the recording with everyone later today, so stay tuned for that. And any last words, AJ or Courtney?
Thank you.
All right.
Mission, guys, continue the great work out there. There's a lot of resources for you guys. You have me and AJ's contact information. If you hit some roadblocks, we don't mind you guys reaching out, but just continue the great work out there.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a good 4th of July.